Good afternoon. I was just sitting in the audience and they were reading the name of this workshop, Home Remodeling Process Made Stress-Free in San Francisco, and someone said, that's impossible. We're going to do our best to make it as stress-free as we possibly can. We have our experts here, the chiefs of the areas that you guys will interface with. The purpose of this workshop is to understand the permitting process, to understand the permit review options, and to be aware of the available resources. And we have with us today Patrick O'Riordan, Chief Building Inspector, Ken Burke, Chief Electrical Inspector, and Steve Pinelli, Chief Plumbing Inspector. Patrick, lead us down the road.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick. I'm Chief Building Inspector at the Department of Building Inspection. Getting a permit provides the minimum standards of habitability and life safety, provide minimum standards of structural and seismic safety, and it ensures the provision of the minimum standards for energy conservation. Additionally, providing verification that construction meets the minimum standards for code compliance. Moving on, educate and prepare yourself. Browse the DBI website, sfdbi.org, for materials and pamphlets. Contact City Planning, www.sf-planning.org. Visit the San Francisco Permit Center at 1660 Mission Street and consult a design professional. That would be an architect or an engineer in most cases. Possible types of permits for residential remodels. Typically the types of permits are over-the-counter permits without plans, over-the-counter permits with plans, and plans requiring intake. Typically these would be horizontal, vertical additions, accessory dwelling units. They would be the typical permits that would require plans or drawings, as we would sometimes say. Possible over-the-counter permits without plans. Typically you would see window replacement, skylight replacement in kind, repair of deck and stairs, typically less than 50% of the structure. Cosmetic kitchen and bathroom remodel would be an over-the-counter with no plans permit. And then we have the dry rot and termite repair permits, which are would be an in-kind replacement of what was being replaced. Possible over-the-counter permits without plans, possible multi-agency review, re-roofing, may require electrical, plumbing, and or mechanical permits from DBI, even if building permit is not required. If scaffolding is required in the public right-of-way, a street permit from DPW, Department of Public Works, must be obtained. Then the typical over-the-counter permits with plans would be kitchen and bathroom remodel, which would involve structural and alteration of floor plan, or one or the other. Deck and stair repair over 50% or replacement in kind. Rooms down, typically we refer to rooms down as the rooms behind the garage area in most buildings in the city. New skylights, foundation repair and upgrades, typically because those permits require engineering. So the engineering would be documented on the drawings. Retaining walls under 10 feet, fences over 6 feet, and voluntary seismic upgrades. I'm going to turn it over to Ken for the next series of slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Plans requiring intake review, new buildings, horizontal additions, vertical additions, solar installations, 4 kW or greater, legalization of units, accessory dwelling units, and change of use occupancy. All of the above require plan review in addition to architectural, structural, and mechanical review. Forms to be used for building permit construction process. This is an application for a building permit that you see on the screen here. It's a pink form. The job card will be issued with that. So you get your building permit application form filled out. You have your inspection record noted on the job card. At the end, everything's done. You get a final certificate of final completion and occupancy. So you're filling out the form, minimum information on the building permit application form 3A, address, block, lot, estimated cost of the job, name and contact information, description of all the work, and if it's addressing a notice of violation that may have been issued prior, and then signed and dated. This is a flow chart for the inspection process. Once the permit is issued, you may begin the work. You will need to schedule appointments with the inspectors throughout the process of the job, whether it's underground or rough inspections, all the way to the final. When you have your final inspection, your inspector will sign off the job card. You'll get a certificate of final completion issued, new construction or change of use, and it'll be put on the website that it's completed.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Finelli, Chief Plumbing Inspector. Can everybody out there here in the back, I hope? This slide that we're showing right now is I want to have it a little bit different. You might have jumped a few slides here. There you go. So this is going to be the basic information of how to get in contact with us. First part is the phone number is 415-558-6570 to call for inspectors, or if you need to talk to your inspector to narrow down a time frame. Please try to give us at least a 48-hour window so we can actually schedule a time frame. Call between 8:30 to 3 p.m. to book your inspections, or you can do so online for plumbing and electrical. It's really easy to do it online, so if you can, please do so. Or have your contractor do it online. What was that? Should be right on the permit. It would be actually on the permit, where you can go to DVI's website and you would go to a link that says things I want to do and schedule an appointment, or schedule an inspection would be what you would click on, and you put your permit number in and you would go through the steps of actually scheduling an appointment. Building inspector general information, contractors can schedule online, speak directly to an inspector. Inspectors are in the field from 8:30 to 3 o'clock, so unless you want to speak with the chief or a senior that's on duty, that's all you're going to get. You will not get your district inspector. To narrow down your window time, if you'd like, you can call between 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. or you can call between 3 and 4 to talk to your inspector if he knows his schedule for the next day, and then they'll actually give you a narrow window.
Are you allowed to contact individual inspector for your property? Do you have any permission?
So, if you want to hold your questions for after I'm done, then we can go from there, because I think there's a lot of other people that might have the same questions you do and they can't hear you, even though I can. Inspection for foundation, steel, and underpinning and shoring. Coordinate by agent or contractor. Building inspector will look at your steel, rebar, bolts, and concrete as approved. Hold down, shear walls, waterproofing, special inspections by engineer. Worker safety, shoring, excavation, and adjoining properties. Electrical, look at the underground prior to cover. Plumbing, underground prior to cover. And please don't forget to call 811 before you dig. If they do, they will be fined if they do not call 811. So please do that beforehand. This is a picture on the next slide on 17. This is a job card. This is what accompanies the pink sheet that Ken was talking about. This will be issued at the time of the permit payment. Owner is required to keep the job card on site and retained for their records. Things do get lost, so please keep this job card. If you look on the job card, it'll also say in there on towards the bottom 3/4 of the page, it'll say electrical and plumbing permits must have a separate permit. This job card does not cover plumbing or electrical permits or mechanical permits for plumbing. Next page is the inside of this job card. Shows the signatures of the rough signatures, underground signatures on the left-hand side. Oh, it's not on there. Well, I have it on mine. So it looks like this. This is the inside of the job card. Shows the signatures of the job card. That's what's inside of the job card. The rough inspections. Make sure that these inspections on this side are done prior to going to the next phase. If this isn't done and complete, we come out for a final and say you never had the rough, and then you get mad at the inspector for asking you to expose and show actual work that's been performed without a seeing being covered. The next slide that we have is this is a cover inspection. Prior to building cover-up, rough framing and building, plumbing, gas, waste, water, and supply, electrical rough, and mechanical rough. Like I said, those are all required in order for us to see them. Back to Mr. Reardon.
And for final inspection, just remember that before the building inspector goes out there, you will need to have your final plumbing inspection, final electrical inspection documented on the job card, as well as mechanical, if mechanical work was part of the project. You may, on some occasions, have a requirement for the DPW street inspector to sign the job card. In rarer cases, there would be a requirement maybe for tree planting, so urban forestry have an inspector that goes out and verifies that the correct tree was planted in the correct place and that the signature is on the job card. Special inspections are typically the engineering requirements that are required based on structural work, when structural work is part of the permitted scope of work. So we get letters from the engineering professionals that will in fact vet the work that was done, and it will show that they have looked at what they needed to look at and that the building is structurally sound and secure, and that will facilitate our final sign-off. Additionally, there may be requirements for energy surrounding windows and insulation and lighting and hot water heaters, etc. So just we have Title 24 compliance requirements anymore too that are mandated by the Energy Commission of the state of California. They're not a specific San Francisco requirement, but they're mandated by the Energy Commission, and we are the repository for affidavits that are submitted by different contractors documenting the fact that the energy requirements have been met on these projects. So when you have all that, it's a lot, but you won't have all of that on every single permit. The simple kitchen, bathroom remodel permits will just be rough electrical, rough plumbing, and final building inspection. But I'm just mentioning all of the others because in the rare instances that you would have all of these other requirements, you would need those other sign-offs and requirements to be met. That's all followed by the final sign-off by the building inspector. The building inspector typically looks for things at the final inspection, like do you have the smoke detectors, do you have the carbon monoxide detectors, and if there were drawings, is everything built per the plans, and then of course they look to see that all the required sign-offs are in place prior to his or her visit to find the building inspector. Certificate of final completion and occupancy is a document that's only issued when there is a change in the building envelope or when there is an addition of a use within the existing building. For example, the creation of habitable rooms down behind the garage, maybe that would facilitate the issuance of, we call it CFC, Certificate of Final Completion. Essentially, really, it's just the approval of the occupancy for a space that didn't have that occupancy before. That's really all it is. And moving on, the CFC itself is shown here, and it's really the document that that shows the occupancy, the legal use and occupancy of the building or a space within the building. So that's what it looks like. It has the permit application number, the details regarding the number of stories, the number of units, and it's signed and dated by the building inspector. Please try to keep that document in a safe place, because it's we consider that a high value document. So if that goes missing or whatever, it's sometimes it's a little bit difficult to replace it. In 99% of the cases, we have all of those documents in our down at DBI. But if you happen to be the 0.5 or 1% of the people who where we can't find it, then we'll be really happy to make sure that you save it somewhere, put it somewhere safe. So I'm just going to turn it over to Kendon for the next one.
So each one of the inspectors, chiefs, are going to go through the most asked questions, but please feel free to ask questions after they finish this part of the presentation.
So some of the frequently asked questions in electrical is an electrical permit needed if I'm upgrading my foundation? The answer is yes. Concrete encased electrodes shall be installed for existing buildings or structures when a new or replacement foundation or footing with a perimeter length of 20 feet or more is installed in direct contact with the earth. So that would require an electrical permit. Do I need to arc fault protect my new laundry outlet? Yes. Laundry areas and dwelling units are required to have arc fault circuit interrupter protection. What electrical code is San Francisco currently enforcing? It's the 2016 California Electrical Code with the San Francisco amendments.
Skip the third one.
I'm mistaken. Do I need to upgrade the wiring in my kitchen if I'm only replacing the cabinets? The answer is yes. If your kitchen hasn't been updated since 1998, then the required circuits will be required to be installed at the time of your kitchen remodel. Sorry, thank you for pointing that out to me. When will the next code cycle be adopted? January 2020. Can a built-in microwave be beyond one of the two required small appliance circuits? No. A built-in appliance requires its own circuit.
What are special inspections in Title 24 requirements? Looks like I got a little bit ahead of myself just now, explaining all that previously. But special inspections, again, are the requirement for a third-party engineering professional to look at structural elements of a building, and that involves that professional going to the job site or having a specifically approved testing agency. The city maintains a list of testing agencies who are people who are credentialed to look at specific parts of the structure of a building. For example, a concrete has to come up to spec for being compressive strength. So typically when you go beyond, it's a crush test, and when you go beyond 3,000 psi, there is that specific requirement for special inspection that involves placement and sampling. Now, the placement is just looking at the concrete being poured in the ground, but the sampling is another matter because those cylinders of concrete that are taken away from the job site are taken to a lab, and they're crush tested at cycles of 8 through 28 days, and they have to come up to the required compressive strength. So that's just an example of one of the special inspection items that would pertain to concrete, for example, which is the foundation of your building. So at the end of the job, we would be looking for the final letters of certification for whatever the requirements were in regards to the structure of the building, and that were laid out on the plans that were approved and issued. And the Title 24 requirements, again, the Title 24 requirements have to do with energy, and we're talking about things like ceiling insulation, wall insulation, raised floor insulation, fenestrations, which are basically where the windows occur or doors occur in a building. You would be looking at things like space heating, space cooling equipment, air distribution systems, water heating systems, roofing products. So what's required is that the appropriate rater would provide DBI with the necessary documentation that would show that the required paperwork had been submitted to the state of California. In other words, we're kind of the gatekeeper in San Francisco for making sure that the mandated requirements of the California Energy Commission have been met by documenting to us that the necessary paperwork has been filed with the state of California. So, condo conversion process. So the condo conversion process, essentially it means if there are maybe 2 or 3 units in a building and the owners want to enter into an agreement to have separate ownerships, 3 separate ownerships in that building, we would get a referral from the Department of Public Works asking us to survey the building for code compliance of when the building was built. We wouldn't go out there and say, okay, this 60-year-old building now, you got to make it compliant to today's standards. We would just look for general compliance with the vintage of the building. So in other words, if we would go out there in the process of looking at a building in regards to condo conversion inspection, the first thing is a permit would be issued for the physical inspection. And we would look at things like if you have dry rot in a deck, if you're missing handrails, guardrails, anything life safety related. And of course, if we saw rooms down that were built without a permit, we would bring that up as something that would need to be settled with a permit to legalize those rooms too. So that oftentimes that comes up, but it's generally it's a process whereby people get a permit. They might have to open up some areas of the construction that was done without a permit, and they would be inspected, and corrections were needed, the corrections would be made, and we would go along and sign off the necessary permit and issue a certificate of final completion for that work. And eventually we would issue a certificate of final completion to comply with the physical inspection report. And when the homeowner gets that, they take that to DPW, and that's when the legal portion of the conversion of the 2 or 3 units that was in the building would occur. And we're past DBI at that point. It's back to DPW and the city surveyor. And they would create 3 separate lots in that block for those 3 new ownerships. Carbon monoxide detectors, are they needed, and where? They're needed if you have a fuel burning appliance in an area, or if you have a forced air furnace. The idea is that if any area of the building, or if the entire building is susceptible to carbon monoxide from any source, there needs to be a carbon monoxide detector installed per manufacturer's instructions on each level of that house, and in a basement if there is a basement, obviously. They don't need to be in the bedrooms unless the bedroom has a fireplace or a solid fuel burning appliance in it. When is planning, okay, I'm after missing one here. Is it a requirement to post a building permit where it can be seen from the public? According to the building code, it's not mandated, but a lot of people like to make a photocopy of the job card and put it on the window so all the neighbors can see that I have a permit, and if somebody complains, they can see I have a permit. So that doesn't necessarily tell anyone what the permit allows them to do, but they have a permit. So what the code states is that the building permit be kept at the site in a conspicuous place, and really what that's meant for is for the inspector, when the inspector comes out, to make notes and to verify that the work is being done according to the permit and associated plans if there are plans. So the answer is, don't put the original job card on the window though, because it gets really faded and nobody can read it, and when the inspector goes out, they won't be able to see what's on it. So make a photocopy, it's always better. When is planning approval required? Again, the planning department, what they look at primarily, and I don't want to speak too much for the planning department, is they look at anything that's visible on the building from the outside. So they're looking at things like windows, they're looking at if you, for example, if you build more than a 3-foot fence at the front of your house, they'll need to look at that. They will look at anything that changes the look of the house. If you go from siding to stucco, or if you make any changes that would be evident from the public right away, the planning department will get involved with that. Additionally, they will be involved with anything that changes the envelope of the building, makes it taller, wider, longer, whatever. They will be involved with that. They will look at things like legalizing portions of the building that were your typical rooms down, for example, at the rear of the garage. They will look at that and approve that as needed. So that's about it for planning. I won't say too much on behalf of planning for many good reasons. So I'll turn it over to Steve for the.
Is this the one here where you talk about involving a person and lawyers to make everything?
No, we'll answer questions when I'm done. We can ask any question you want after that. But right now, let me finish, and then you can ask any question you want, please. Right now. You're gonna hear it right now. All right. So when replacing a water heater with a tankless water heater, are there code challenges? Yes, there are. So basic water heater that you have right now is already piped with a gas line. You have your flute pipe, your strapping, your bracing. The requirements change when you have a tankless water heater. A lot of people like the space, right? Space saving, they're smaller, they don't have a big tank. The problem comes into play is the amount of BTUs, the amount of gas that you need for a tankless water heater. How a tankless water heater works, it runs really slow water through, gives you a lot of gas, so it heats up really quick. Problem is that the gas is so much bigger and the strain is so much more that you have to actually increase the gas line that you have. So that's a big challenge for a lot of people to run a whole new gas line from where the location of their water heater is all the way back to their meter sometimes. So they end up running a whole new line. They don't know about that until it's too late. So we come out there, we see it, we tell them, well, now you have to change it. Now it's another expense. I'm letting you know now, so when we tell you then, you're aware of it. The other thing is that comes into play is the flue liner that comes in play with that water heater. The water heater you have right now, most of your water heaters are type B flue. It's a double wall flue. How it works is when the water heater is on fire and it's heating up your water, or just the pilot's heating up, it heats up the flue pipe, the metal, and heat rises. It takes that carbon monoxide out and everything evacuates from the area. With a tankless water heater, it's a high flue again, high gas. What happens is now you have to put a stainless steel flue in there. Again, we come out, you have a type B flue in there, it's gonna rot through it. You can't tie your tankless water heater in. Some people have them. Like I do at home, I have my water heater, and right next to it is my furnace. So I'll come off of my water heater, ties into my furnace, it continues, it goes all the way up to the roof. You won't be able to do that with a tankless water heater. Those have to go independent all the way to the top of the roof or the proper location, depending on the type of tankless water heater you have. One question I get a lot is capture my rainwater. Are there any issues? Somebody was asking it at one of the locations over there. Earlier I talked to them about it. Rainwater, if you want to capture it into a barrel, do I need a permit? I advise you to get a permit for it. It was a strong reason for it is you're disconnecting in San Francisco your rainwater leaders from your sewers. Outside of San Francisco, 95% of the places outside of San Francisco, their rainwater leaders go to the ground and discharge out to the street or to their backyard or to some surface area. Here, we tie into the sanitary system. You're in a combined system here. You don't have a separate storm and sanitary. Almost 90% of San Francisco is like that. So if you're going to capture your rainwater, you're actually disconnecting from your sanitary area. We're looking at when you capture that water, now does that water actually discharge when it rains a big storm? Well, you got a 55-gallon drum. That might fill up in a heartbeat. Next thing you know, what do you do with that extra water? That extra water is now going, because we live on such a flat area in San Francisco, that water goes into the backyard and goes to your neighbor. Now your neighbor calls up and complains, we come out, and now we have a problem. Now we have to make adjustments. Do we have to put a drain in? Do we have to reroute your piping? Do you have to have an overflow? Where does it go? These are questions we ask. I suggest if you're planning to do this, come down to the office, come down to 1660 Mission Street, come to the 3rd floor, you can ask for me, that's fine, Steve Pinelli, and I'll come out there and I'll talk with you and I'll walk you through what you can and cannot do. Because trust me, you gotta remember, a 55-gallon drum weighs over 400 pounds when it's filled with water. If you're on the hillside, you have a little earthquake, that's why we're here, earthquake fair, have a little earthquake, that rolls over, it's gonna go through your fence and kill somebody or make some major damage. We don't want that to happen. If I replace my water heater, do I need a permit? And if so, can I obtain a homeowner's permit? Yes and yes. Come down to the office, see me again, usually in the office all the time. I'll ask you a few questions, grant you the permit for the water heater, call for an inspection, make an appointment, and go for it. Now, one thing I'll let everybody know. You do not, and I just say this, if it's an emergency, it's a Friday night, your water heater goes out and you need to replace it, go ahead and replace it. Come down on Monday morning and get that permit. It's an emergency thing. The reason why I tell you this is because if you don't do it, what happens is your neighbor sees you doing it, or somebody else, and they call in and they say it's work without permit. The permit that would have cost you $140 for the permit is now going to cost you 9 times that amount. So I really don't want that to happen because of our time that we go out there and investigate it. It's a lot easier to come down and work with us straight up, and we'll help you out any way we possibly can. Okay? Gary?
Thank you. Those are the most popular questions. I did hear a question from one of the audience members. They were murmuring, what is a special inspection? Patrick, you briefly covered that. Could you elaborate, please?
Okay. I think I elaborated twice, but I can give it another shot.
They didn't get it.
Okay, so special inspections again are the structural requirements that are documented on the approved plans that are issued with the building permit, and the special inspections would depend on the scope of work that was being performed. So just think about a rear addition to a building where you're building 10 feet onto the existing building that you have. So the special inspections are third-party inspections, which would be under the authority of an engineer, engineer of record typically for the project, and maybe testing agency professionals, which are certified inspectors that go out and look at these structural portions of a building. When they have done the inspections pertaining to this rear addition, they would have looked at things like foundation, they would have looked at things like reinforcing steel in the foundation, placement and sampling of concrete, which I think we went through in the previous discussion. They would look at things like the hold down bolts for the seismic of that portion of the building. They would look at the shear wall nailing and the nailing of the plywood on the floors, which is referred to as the shear diaphragm. And the shear diaphragm would also consist of the nailing of the roof plywood. And when you have an engineer's letter, a final letter saying all of these things have been done to code and done per the approved drawings and what that engineer had initially required on the drawings, and we have that letter, that would be the list of special inspections that would facilitate the final approval and issuance of the occupancy for that addition to the rear of the building. That's just one example of a scope of work where you would have special inspections. And that's the most closely related special inspection list that you would get in regards to what the typical homeowner or the typical remodel or a minor expansion would involve. So,
I know there was a few other questions that were in the crowd. If you want to get up or stand up and ask them, we're here to answer them. I know there's one here and one here. You want them to come up there, Gary?
Please.
Yeah, if you guys could please go up to the mic, that would be great so everybody can hear the questions.
Very simple question. So you talked about surface drainage, but subsurface drainage like a French drain or a foundation drain,
Correct?
right? So is the city's goal to also run that into the main sewer line?
Yes, that's correct. So that gets collected. It actually goes into a catch basin, which would be a sand interceptor, which would collect any debris that could possibly get into the sanitary system, and then that would then in turn go into the sanitary system.
Wow.
It does tie in. It sounds like it's a big deal, but it's kind of like one step, this step, done. It's you got the foundation drain, that's underneath into the ground. It's collecting that water. You have a 24 by 24, or it's actually 18 inch by 18 inch catch basin,
Yeah.
which it would go into. Then you'd have a turn down 90 that would go into the box and then out. You'd have a clean out there, and then that would continue all the way in and tie into the sanitary system as close as possible. Then that would collect all your solids. You'd have a grate on top so it can be monitored. So if you had something where you were getting a lot of dirt in there, it would actually plug that, turn down 90, and you would see you have an issue and clear that out. The reason why we do that is because if you had a French drainage and you actually tied it directly into the sanitary system, and we had a stoppage in the sanitary system, that would actually back up and become and make your French drain into a leach field.
Right.
Right? So then you would never know you had a problem. So that's one of the reasons why we have it.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I had a question about intake plans. Excuse me. If you're doing an addition that is under the second floor area that overhangs the first floor, can you still get an over-the-counter if you're just building out to that level?
Simple answer is no, because the planning department would probably want to take it in and look at the expansion of that lower floor. So that would be more of a question for our people at planning, but and that's what I would think. That's how it would work. I
I
think.
have heard from them, but that's basically,
Yeah, it's more of a planning question.
okay, all right, well, they told me I could do it. It's
Yeah,
it's about-
good.
I just want to find out if there's any conflict.
I won't contradict what they told you.
Sir in the blue hat, you had a question?
Just a couple of questions. First one,
All right, loud enough so they can hear it.
first question was, we want to contact prospective inspector. Do they have email or direct number available?
Okay, so the question was, how do I contact the district inspector? Is that correct?
Well,
For your district, your home, whatever, where you're at.
Not by phone, do they have email address available?
The easy answer is yes, they do. And again, you go on a DBI website and you can find it on there. You can find the org chart. It will give you the name and actually give you the email. And if it doesn't have the email, which I believe it does, but it would be their first name, a dot in front of their first name, their last name, and then at sfgov.org.
So basically go to the organization chart and look for the email address.
Correct. And the easiest thing would be to go to call DBI if you want to speak to the district inspector, and the number is the same for plumbing, electrical, and building.
Second question, can you clarify, I was cited to get a permit for plumbing and heating. Basically, I did remodel countertop, tile floor, replaced 2 appliances, refrigerator, and the stove. And I was told that I need to get a permit, so I had to pay for the plumbing, and I believe for the heating. And I didn't understand that. It's
So-
just an upgrade of the property.
So you did a remodel in your kitchen.
Remodel the kitchen, mainly the 2 appliances, countertop, and the tile floor.
Okay,
Can you explain why I need the permit? I was
Sure,
told
I'll tell you right now.
for the 2
No problem. So for the heating, I don't know why the heating, I don't know what was touched for the heating. I can't,
Mechanical, I'm sorry,
for the mechanical, I don't know what was touched for the mechanical. I'd have to ask. I'd have to see the complaint. I don't know. I can't. You're specific. As a generalization for the kitchen remodel that's being done, we ask for a plumbing permit. It's required based on the sink that you're installing, and we have to make sure that that's a listed sink and that it meets the requirements that's mandated, that the faucets meet everything, the lead requirement, that the water connections are correct, that the dishwasher is being installed, that it actually goes through an air gap, it's not directly connected, so you don't have wastewater getting back into your dishwasher that can cause harm to yourselves and then everybody else. We actually look for that on the stove, the range top that's being installed. If you have a range, we're looking for the clearances and for the anti-tip for your stove. So if you have a child and they pull the stove and they open it up and they stand on top of it, that it doesn't fall over and kill them. So that's one of the reasons why we ask for a plumbing permit.
So again, to me, it's common sense. You basically, like what you're telling me, when you're replacing appliances, you need to get a permit. Yes.
Yes, correct.
Okay, that part I didn't understand.
Yes.
The contractor told me that when you're upgrading appliances, refrigerator, stove, dishwasher, as long as you meet the code, you don't need to get a permit.
That's incorrect.
That was incorrect.
That's incorrect.
That's why I was puzzled. Why would you go down?
I make this really simple for everybody, and a lot of people ask these questions, and one of the biggest things comes into, and myself and Ken and Pat, is different products come online all the time. Doesn't mean every product is listed according to what is accepted in California. So somebody will go down, for example, say to Mexico and buy a sink, and they come down here and they want to install it here. Unfortunately, we're going to turn that sink down because it isn't made to standard. You drop a razor in there, it could shatter the sink. It's a glass bowl. Next thing you know, you got shards of glass all over the floor. That's a problem. So, and that's a severe example, but I mean, that's exactly what we're looking for. We want to make sure everything meets the minimum requirements, so the installation in California and meets code, and you're safe. It's a safety issue.
Quick question about the special inspections, and I guess a form that you guys didn't necessarily touch on, which is the slope protection and seismic hazard form. I was wondering if you can clarify the differences between the showing on the special inspection that are required and the showing that's also required on the slope hazard protection form.
Okay. Generally, that's handled by our plan check engineering staff.
Right.
But from what you're describing, anything that would have geotech special inspection requirement on it would be something that would be necessary prior to the completion of the project, and in regards to us being provided with that letter from a geotech.
Correct. I was just more curious about what are the requirements for which one, which I guess like this showing for the special inspection is structural related,
Right.
and then is the seismic and slope protection form more related to the geotech?
Yeah, it would be
Okay.
very much depending on the engineering that would be
Yeah.
shown on the documents, and kind of a plan check engineering question, really.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Afternoon. I have a question for, I guess, the plumbing inspector. My brother and I own a two-flat building in the Mission. Building's over 100 years old. The building is adjacent to a very similar two-flat building. There's a common sewer line, okay? My neighbors had a problem with the sewer line that crossed her property line and went to the street, and she was replacing it. We get a phone call from her trustee saying, and she's an elderly citizen, saying that the city will red tag our building when they cut our sewer line off. Anyway, to make a long story short, my brother went to the inspector's office after we paid $2,000 to have a contractor basically connect to this public sewer line to the sidewalk. We're in it $2,000. We got estimates from about 5 different plumbing outfits in San Francisco, all telling us you must put in a separate sewer line for $30,000. My brother went to the inspector. The inspector set him right and told him that it is the property owner next door that has to replace the sewer line and that they can't cut us off, and saved us $30,000. So I want to compliment you and your workers in giving us good advice, saving us a lot of money. But what do you know about this? Is this a common
Okay.
problem in San Francisco?
So you have a common situation. Thank you for the question. Common situation is you got a lot of old homes that certain homes were built prior to the neighbors being built, or it was one big lot and gets subdivided. And what happens is you have a common sewer that has more than one lot that's involved in that common sewer. We do not make you or the neighbor or anybody else get off that line. That's considered a private line at that point between the, let's say, 4 neighbors or 2 neighbors. That's private. We do not make you change it. Now, if you actually started to do a remodel at your property and somebody said, hey, you're doing everything all the way up to, you have to continue and do all the way out because now it's provided it's there. It's a major remodel, it shall be done. If you were just fixing something inside your house, doing a remodel upstairs, we would not make you change that all out. We would not make your neighbor get off it as well. You would both be required to actually fix that break where that needs to be done. And the notice of violation, let's just say somebody called and said it was broken, would go to you and the neighbor, saying we have a problem at this location, you're both on it, it's a common sewer, you're both responsible for it. Now, if you both want to sit there and argue between both of you of who's going to pay for it, or I want you off it, no, I want you off it, that's a civil matter. Come down and see me, I'll sit there and talk with you, explain both sides of it, but that's between you and the lawyers and everybody else. But yeah, I'm happy that one of my staff was able to help you. I don't know if it was me, but what address was it?
You can take the credit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Before we let these fine gentlemen get away, we're going to do our raffle.
So, first number 395, 395. Next number 505, 505. Next number 410, 410. Next number 442, 442. And the last 545, 545.
I think we owe these gentlemen a round of applause. They did a wonderful job today. Thank you.